questions now, but I don't know if everyone just needs to take a few seconds to breathe deeply, because I've heard all that many, many times before, and I just have to sit here and control, don't get annoyed, because it's so stupid. What we are doing in this country on fossil fuel subsidies makes no sense at all. So that's okay. And we've got to channel that annoyance into this campaign to stop fossil fuel subsidies. Now we do have time for questions. We've got a few microphones roving around, so throw your hand up and Mike will come to you and just...
I thought the federal government had signed up to actually cut all fossil fuel subsidies. I thought that was a commitment that they'd made in the international community. If so, what's happened?
So the federal government supported the G20 statement, which called for all countries to abolish inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. The federal government wrote a formal submission to the G20 and the OECD nations saying we have no inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Ours are efficient.
I don't know, I think efficient fossil fuel subsidies is like saying healthy poison.
And perhaps it was an on-call promise, I'm not sure.
I'd like to welcome this campaign, but I think we should emphasise the international dimension of it, our coal exports. It's not just our coal-fired power stations here. People are very short-term minded and centred on their homes and their domestic, bills. I think you need to comment on extend it, and also this campaign, Environment Victoria. I hope you really are gearing up and ramping up with the other states, especially Queensland and New South Wales, where the real impact of the coal industry and gas is happening.
Yeah, it's a good point. I did reference a lot of the export issues, and we're working very closely. We're actually driving an alliance in collaboration with national and state-based groups, which hopefully will go live very soon. The diesel fuel rebate is all about money to coal mining companies, and of course we dig up twice as much coal for export as we burn domestically in Australia, and this the diesel fuel rebate, or fuel tax credits program as they renamed it, is central to the ability of a number of companies to get up their new mines in Queensland and New South Wales, very large mega mines. Obviously.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's really weird that the Australian government is coal it does. We export in emissions, embedded in the coal, more emissions than we actually create in Australia. And it's only going to get larger. There are huge mines up in Queensland that are currently being constructed that are going to, and large ports that are going to ship overseas. It's only going to make that worse.
If I could just add, we're also working very deeply on the issue of the debate around talking about allocating 13 billion tonnes of coal. The 13 billion tonnes of coal is hard to get a grasp on the size of that. That's the equivalent to 6 years' worth of China's emissions if all that coal was exported. And the companies behind these projects are looking to establish a new brown coal export industry, establish a new trade in a commodity which is not traded globally because it's viewed as being too poor quality and too polluting. So there's a number of dimensions of the international connection on this one.
Are there other questions? Yep.
Yes. Since it's election year, I think this is a very positive thing to take into account with the electorate. And I'd say it's a direct action thing. How can you compare that with the current coalition's policies, what they really are? They're called direct action.
The coalition, from what we know about it, the coalition's direct action policy proposes to spend $3 billion in their first 4 years in government to reduce emissions. Somehow they think that's going to be enough money to achieve the 5% emission reduction target, which we all know is incredibly inadequate. But there's real questions about whether it's actually going to be enough money to do that. And if you think about $3 billion over 4 years, that's $750 million a year, and they're still proposing, I assume, to spend, $10, $12, $13 billion a year on fossil fuel subsidies. So at the moment, we don't have a credible policy agenda from the coalition. Fossil fuel subsidies, I mean, both political parties are committed to funding the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Both are important but expensive projects. And the question is, where's the money going to come from? And we need to make that as easy as
found basically that there is no way with the amount of money they're spending that they can possibly reach the 5% target, get anywhere close to it. And basically we worked that out by looking at other state government policies that are basically very similar to the coalition's to reduce emissions by handing out grants. And the very best one of those was GGAS in New South Wales, and it managed to achieve 40% of its projected emissions reductions. The amount they aimed at with the money they spent, they only achieved 40%. And that the direct action scheme can possibly achieve a -5% target, no matter how much money they throw out. They certainly can't do it with the amount of money that they have.
The mining and coal industries from farmers. I mean, I'm assuming that you don't particularly want to put farmers out of business. And they are trying to change, but it's going to be a long, slow process.
Yes. So we're in this campaign, we're identifying the total size of the fossil fuel subsidies. So that includes all the money that's spent on the diesel fuel rebate, whether it goes to the mining industry, farming industry, and transport. Road transport is actually a really large recipient. They receive about 30%, about $6 billion. Our budget submission is quite clear that you should start by taking the money away from the mining industry if it's viewed that the subsidies that are going to agricultural industries are rational. The priority number one is the mining subsidy, and others in the main probably need to set our sights on the biggest targets. Yep.
And I mean, the other way you can do these sort of things is if you want to give subsidies to farmers, you don't want to take away that subsidy, you can give it in a different way. I mean, giving them a rebate on, i.e. exempting them from having to pay tax on their petrol is the worst way of doing it. You're better off giving them a cash grant about how much you think they're going to do, because what a diesel fuel rebate does is it encourages them to use diesel. If somebody comes along and has a scheme that can electrify, so turn some of their diesel machines into electric machines, it's not worth it for them because they're getting cheap diesel. Whereas if you just gave them a cash grant or a subsidy in some other way, then it might be worth them switching from diesel to some other form of fuel.
Right-wing think tanks spend their time telling us that government intervention and subsidies and taxes are really inefficient and should be, spend their life campaigning against exactly what you want to campaign for. And I mean, Ross Garner said in his report that too much subsidies to the power stations will kill the tax. Do you see any of these parties being allies in this campaign?
Well, the short answer is probably no, but it makes it harder for them to campaign against such a thing. I mean, I said in my talk that you can ultimately win this because there is no good reason. And ultimately, your right-wing think tanks and your free market economists should not object to the government taking away subsidies. That's what they believe. That's the fundamental tenet of their ideology. So while you might not get the IPA out supporting you, it would be difficult for these sort of groups to campaign against such a thing.
Community saying we could spend money on this pool or this piece of public transport in this community if we had a mining tax, and that's what we want to create. We can't, as I've said, we can't win the battle of the lobbyists. We can do a bit of advertising, hopefully. However, we really need to be out there in communities. We've polled Victorians in the past on their preference for government investment in fossil fuel projects versus renewable energy projects. We know where communities' opinion is at. As Matt said, the mining industry has the most to lose if you're thinking about this in a very short-term way, whereas for everybody else, that's an important issue, but it's one of many. We really need to elevate the status of this issue across the community and make sure that it's not invisible. And the really important thing is that
there's no decision, well, the decision point for these fossil fuel subsidies is annually, that they just get rolled over. In the next budget, it's expected that it will be there again. There's no discussion or decision around it. We need to force a discussion in the party rooms. We need to force a decision around it. So when they are, looking at what they're going to cut spending on, and they've been pretty good, the federal government and state governments at cutting spending, that this actually is at the top of their minds. And backbenchers who've never previously engaged with the issue are going, yeah, why are we spending money to help the mining industry get wealthier so that they can run advertising campaigns against us? We really need to elevate the status of the issue.
Is there a danger that they will seem to agree, the government, to remove assistance going under some other name, like tax concessions or something else that's hidden to the public?
I guess the point I make on that is that they've tried pretty hard to hide the existence of these programs. You have to look pretty hard for the detail of these programs. And for instance, I would have thought that if we're giving the mining industry $2 billion a year to pay for their diesel bill, I would have thought as an Australian citizen, it'd be pretty reasonable for me to know who's getting that money, how much is Rio Tinto getting, how much is Extract getting, etc., etc. That's not possible to find out. It's all pretty deeply buried, but I'm confident that we're good enough at the detail, and mobs like the Australia Institute go over the budget papers forensically. We'll know if they try hard.
The tax concessions are, so I mean, all the budget outlays are in the budget, but the tax concessions are actually held in a paper, an annual report put out by Treasury called the Tax Expenditure Statement, which is a ripping read if you ever have insomnia. And I mean, I'm quite a nerd in that when it comes out, I actually get excited and go and look at the numbers and see how they change. So, I mean, you can find them, it's just that they're difficult.
Any final questions? I've got one up there.
Yeah, the provisions in the Australian Tax Act that favour mining, should we be trying to separate coal, oil and gas so that they're eventually separate? I know they're getting slightly better deal anyway, but they should be getting a worse deal. Should we be bringing that up now, knowing that we won't get anywhere, but just one extra thing that we're pushing for in that area? I don't know.
I think it's a good question, but I haven't thought very much about it, so I won't get an answer.
Likewise. I mean, you could separate them out. A lot of the tax concessions go to specific industries, so you can separate those out. Some of the more general stuff, like the diesel fuel rebate, is for everybody. I mean, the ATO recently split out the mining industry, and transport and agriculture and the other ones. But usually it's just one big lump. So some of them are easy to split out, some of them aren't.